Put your hand on your throat right now. Feel that? That's roughly 2 liters of water your body is going to demand today, whether you've got a tap, a bottle, or nothing at all. For over 99% of human history, nothing at all was the default setting. And getting that wrong, drinking from the wrong puddle, trusting the wrong animal, didn't give you a stomachache. It started a countdown. So here's what's coming. The smell test our ancestors actually relied on. And it works better than you'd think. The animal you should never, ever follow to water. A well, one of humanity's proudest inventions, that turned out to be a death trap for the people who dug it. And a parasite discovered in 3,500-year-old Egyptian mummies that is, right now, this year, still infecting people in Chad. Let's start with the deadline. You can survive about 3 weeks without food. Without water, you're looking at 3 days, maybe 4 if you're lucky and it's not hot out. That's not a guideline. That's a biological hard stop. Your kidneys need water to flush toxins. Your blood needs it to stay thin enough to actually move. Cut off the supply, and your organs start shutting down in a specific, brutal order. This is the evolutionary why underneath everything in this video. Natural selection doesn't care about your comfort. It cares about your next 36 hours. Every human alive today is descended from people who solved the water problem correctly, over and over, for hundreds of thousands of years. The ones who guessed wrong simply didn't get to pass on the guess. And here's the cruel twist. Water is everywhere. Rivers, lakes, puddles, dew on leaves. The problem was never finding water. The problem was finding water that wouldn't kill you slower than thirst would. The kind loaded with bacteria, parasite eggs, or animal waste. A stagnant pond can look perfectly inviting and still be a biohazard. Nature does not label its poison. So without lab tests, without microscopes, without so much as a boil advisory sign, how do you tell the difference between water that sustains you and water that ends you? Turns out, you read the land like it owes you an answer. Before there were wells, there was pattern recognition, and it was terrifyingly precise. Certain trees only grow where roots can reach a water table. Green vegetation cutting through dry, cracked earth is basically the landscape screaming, "Underground stream here." Valleys converge for a reason. Water runs downhill, and where multiple slopes meet, it pools. This is the evolutionary why in action again. Not a mystical sixth sense, but generations of trial, error, and brutal consequence compressed into cultural knowledge and passed down like a survival manual nobody wrote down. Researcher Louis Liebenberg, who spent decades documenting Kalahari sand tracking practices, found that expert trackers could read soil moisture, animal droppings, and even the angle of insect flight paths to locate water sources kilometers away, without ever seeing the water itself. Think about that. Reading insects to find water. That's not folklore. That's applied environmental science, just without the lab coats. And it raises an uncomfortable question. If humans could read the land this precisely, why did they still need help from the animals living on it? Because sometimes the land lies, and sometimes so do the animals. Here's the cross-species lens. For most of human history, animals weren't just food or threat, they were informants. Bees rarely nest far from a water source, so a beeline, literally, could lead you home to a spring. Doves and pigeons need to drink daily and fly in straight, purposeful lines toward water at dawn and dusk. Follow the flight path, find the source. Reindeer doing drug recycling in Siberia, sure, respect, but a thirsty dove doing free GPS work for early humans? That's the real MVP. But, and this is the reversal, not every animal is trustworthy. Some birds, like flamingos, thrive in soda lakes so alkaline and saline they'd wreck a human digestive system in hours. These animals evolved specialized filtering systems humans simply don't have. Watching a flock of birds calmly drinking from a lake told you nothing about whether you could survive drinking it. So the rule our ancestors had to learn wasn't trust animals, it was trust the right animals for the right reasons. And get that distinction wrong even once, and there was no do-over. Which raises the obvious next question. If you can't always trust your eyes or the wildlife around you, what do you actually test the water with? Long before filtration paper and pH strips, the human face was the testing kit. Smell for sulfur or rot. Look for scum, algae blooms, or unusual insect activity clustered on the surface. A cluster of biting flies is basically nature's hazard tape. Taste, cautiously, in tiny amounts, for the metallic tang of contamination or an off, stagnant flatness that fresh water shouldn't have. This is the gritty detail nobody romanticizes. Our ancestors were essentially licking the environment to stay alive. And it worked, for the things senses can detect. Established science here, no hedging. Strong sulfurous smell does correlate with bacterial activity, and murky water genuinely does carry a higher pathogen load, on average, than clear running water. But here's the multi-causal problem underneath all of it. Contamination isn't one threat, it's several stacked on top of each other. Bacteria, parasite eggs, protozoa, heavy metals, and the truly dangerous part? Several of the deadliest ones are completely invisible to human senses. No smell, no taste, no warning. Which means fresh, clear, running water, the gold standard everyone assumed was automatically safe, might not have been safe at all. For a long time, the assumption, even among archaeologists, was straightforward. Once ancient civilizations built real infrastructure, aqueducts, sewers, engineered sanitation, intestinal disease should have dropped off a cliff. Clean tech, cleaner guts. Case closed. Recent evidence has completely demolished that assumption. Cambridge paleoparasitologist Piers Mitchell reviewed archaeological evidence of intestinal parasites across the Roman world, a civilization famous for its aqueducts, public latrines, and multi-chambered sewer systems, and found something genuinely strange. Parasite prevalence, including whipworm and roundworm, didn't meaningfully decline compared to pre-Roman populations. In some measures, certain parasites appear to have been more common in the sanitation-equipped Roman era. This is Tier 2 territory. Reasonable, well-supported inference, not settled certainty. Researchers propose that Roman sanitation habits, like using communal sponge sticks and fertilizing crops with human waste, may have actually helped parasites recirculate rather than eliminating them. Infrastructure without an understanding of why it needed to exist wasn't automatically protective. So, what does that mean for someone drinking from a clear, fast-running stream 10,000 years earlier with no infrastructure at all? It means looks clean was never the same thing as is clean. Our ancestors weren't just fighting dirty water, they were fighting invisible water. Eventually, some of them got desperate enough to dig. If you can't always trust the surface, go underneath it. Some of the oldest known water wells on Earth were discovered at Kisanerga Maluthkia in Cyprus, dated to roughly 9,000 to 10,500 years old, carved directly into bedrock by Neolithic farmers who understood, correctly, that groundwater filtered through rock and soil was often safer than anything sitting exposed on the surface. This is the multi-causal reveal, and it's a big one. Humans didn't land on one solution to contaminated water. They independently converged on several. Wells, to access filtered groundwater. Boiling, which, established science stated plainly, reliably kills the vast majority of waterborne pathogens through heat alone. And filtration itself. The ancient Indian medical text, the Sushruta Samhita, compiled roughly 2,000 to 2,500 years ago, explicitly describes purifying water by straining it through sand and charcoal and boiling it before drinking. 3 separate strategies, 3 separate cultures, in some cases separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all converging on the same core insight independently because the pressure, die from thirst or die from what you drink, was universal. But engineering the problem away didn't mean humans solved it completely, and that raises an uncomfortable question worth confronting head-on. Here's the pushback you've probably already thought of. Didn't ancient people just have stronger stomachs? Tougher guts, built different, able to shrug off what would floor a modern person. Partially true, mostly misleading. Established science. Ancient populations likely did have gut microbiomes shaped by constant, low-level pathogen exposure, a kind of ongoing immune priming modern sanitized environments don't replicate. That's real and measurable in some comparative microbiome studies. But tougher implies immunity, and that's where the record gets brutal instead of impressive. Child mortality in most ancient populations sat somewhere around 30 to 50% before age 5, and waterborne illness was a consistent, major contributor. That's not toughness. That's an unforgiving filter. The people we're descended from survived exposures that killed enormous numbers of their siblings.
As for the exact mechanisms, how much of that resistance was microbiome, genetics, or repeated low-dose exposure building tolerance? The honest answer is, we don't fully know, and reconstructing it precisely from bones and dirt probably has limits we can't fully overcome. That's a genuinely open question, not a settled one. So no, ancient humans weren't invincible. They just paid a horrifying price for whatever resistance they had. And some of what they were fighting hasn't actually left. Guinea worm, Dracunculus medinensis, has been found calcified inside Egyptian mummies dating back roughly 3,500 years and is widely believed to be referenced in the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts on Earth. The infection is almost cinematic in its horror. You drink water containing microscopic water fleas carrying the larvae, and roughly a year later, a worm up to a meter long slowly emerges through a burning blister in your skin. For thousands of years, there was no cure, just the same excruciating extraction method depicted in ancient carvings. Wind the worm around a stick, a few centimeters a day, for weeks without breaking it. This isn't Tier 3 speculation either. It's established, documented, and honestly, one of the most viscerally awful things humans have ever endured on a loop for millennia. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Thanks to a massive, decades-long global eradication campaign, guinea worm disease has plummeted from an estimated 3.5 million annual cases in the 1980s to a tiny handful of cases confined mostly to Chad in recent years. It's on the verge of becoming only the second human disease ever eradicated. But it isn't gone. Right now, in 2026, somewhere, someone is drinking water an ancient Egyptian would have recognized as dangerous and getting infected by the exact same organism. 10,000 years of solving this problem, and we're still finishing the job. Here's the thing you can't unsee now. Every time you glance at a glass of water and hesitate for half a second, cloudy, weird smell, been sitting out too long, you're not being paranoid. You're running software installed by people who died so that instinct could exist. The wince at a stagnant puddle, the reflexive trust of running water over still. None of that is random. It's inherited risk assessment, refined across roughly 300,000 years of people getting it wrong and simply not surviving to pass down the mistake. You are, right now, walking around as a living archive of your ancestors' worst days. Their thirst, their guesswork, their funerals for the people who guessed incorrectly. Every clean glass from a tap is the end result of an unbroken chain of correct decisions stretching back to a Neolithic farmer testing bedrock with a digging stick, and a mother in Cyprus deciding a well was worth the labor of carving it into solid rock. We didn't just learn to find clean water. We became creatures shaped entirely by the search for it.